And that abutment in this bridge work that we're talking about is the gospel, the message of Jesus.
Every evangelical church says, okay, you need to trust Jesus as Messiah. That's the thing. And so often we catch this thing of, well, once I've done that, I'm done.
Building bridges, so we're reaching out. Instead of building castles, thinking in this day and age, those lost will just wander in.
We kind of call it springboard evangelism, where you take a particular situation and relate that to in a person's life. And then from that, you're able to move from secular conversations into a spiritual conversation.
Welcome to What Now, the Post-COVID Church podcast. The purpose, creating not just conversations, but stories geared towards energizing Christians to engage the lost and hurting in your community. Here is your host, Stuart Kellogg, author of The Post-COVID Church.
The church is not a place into which people escape from the world, but it is God's bridgehead into the world. Christians are called to live as signposts to the new creation, as the bridge of the Messiah. That's a quote from Christian theologian N.T. Wright, and is the foundation of this podcast. Today, meet Dr. Ron Tyler, a former pastor, evangelism explosion executive, and author of You Want Me to Do What? It's a lesson for the post-COVID church, as it focuses on Christ's command to make disciples, which means connecting to the lost through bridges. Ron Tyler was a very successful information technology programmer and analyst, riding the wave of the computer explosion, when something strange happened while he and his wife Belinda attended a Christian retreat.
All of a sudden, I felt led to pray this prayer. I said, I'll be anything you want me to be. I'll go anywhere you want me to go, and I'll do anything you want me to do. And then at that time, I felt God said, I'm going to use you to reach hundreds of thousands of people for me.
After much prayer, they finished building their house in Georgia, sold it, he quit his job, and went to seminary. He pastored at 3 Georgia churches for a decade.
Things that seemed to be impossible, but through a deeper walk of faith, the trust, then we saw him accomplish many different things.
Evangelism Explosion, an evangelistic ministry and training program, called him. His churches caught the group's eye because of their evangelism effectiveness.
Because we were not just talking about evangelism, we were actually training our members how to do that, and they were going out and doing it.
Through using EE, training others to be disciples, Ron says more than half the people visited came to a personal relationship with Christ and joined the church. He and his family moved to Kenya, serving as missionary. Ron is the vice president of Africa for Evangelism Explosion International. An example of the method learned long ago bore fruit recently when an installer came to upgrade his Wi-Fi and noticed the Bibles and other Christian material in Ron's office.
When I meet you spiritual people, I usually like to ask this question, and I thought, oh no, what's he going to ask me? That I've probably something I can't answer. And he went on to say, do you think God has a purpose for my life? And so, of course,
that's a nice opening.
Yes, that was, I thought, boy, that was a great opening. And so I said, yes, I do. And we'd already been talking. So I was already building a relationship with him. I was already building that bridge of friendship. You got to build a level of friendship. And then as you build that friendship, then the person is able to be more comfortable with you and you're more comfortable with them. And so I said, yes, but before you do, may I ask you some questions? And so he ended up, one of the questions I asked, and I know this is a question that some people, not too sure about, but I think if you use it properly in the proper setting, it works. Because I said, have you come to the place in your spiritual life where you know for certain if you were to die today, that you'd go to heaven? And I said, you look like you're in very good health and you look like you're going to live for a long time. Well, surprisingly, he said, no. And he said, he pulled up his sleeve, his shirt sleeve, And he showed me a mark, and he said, I was in downtown Atlanta, and I was at a particular concert, and somebody started shooting, and I got shot right here in my arm. And so, that was a very appropriate question for him because he almost died from that. Well, I went on and presented the gospel to him. And then at the end, he was a wonderful man, very tall, about 6'5", and very muscular. And I said, do you mind us kneeling down over here? I said, we don't have to kneel down, but, he got a little more to my height by then. And we prayed, and then he turned around after he prayed. I thought he was going to leave. And you know what he said? He asked me, he said, I've got another question for you. I'm living with a lady who gave birth to my 2 children, and the 2 children are living with us. What do you think I should do? And I said, well, you just asked Jesus to come into your life. Why don't we kneel back down here and you ask God what he thinks you should do? And that's what we did. And he asked, of course, I didn't hear the answer. And then he said, amen. And I turned to him. I said, what'd God say to you? He said, I should marry her.
The natural reaction would have been for you to say, go marry her tonight.
Right. Yes, that's the natural. But I've learned over the years that I need to just listen more and ask questions.
Ron emphasizes the importance of connecting with those we speak with, building bridges, so we're reaching out, instead of building castles, thinking in this day and age, those lost will just wander in.
Well, when you're doing that, you're building bridges. And so you build relationships with people. So you don't just come in and immediately ask them a question. You have to build a relationship with them. And when you do that, then you have something in common. And so we kind of call it springboard evangelism, where you take a particular situation and relate that to in a person's life. And then from that, you're able to move from secular conversations into a spiritual conversation.
Have you found that even just compared to a generation ago, because there's less of a general knowledge about the faith, that introduction takes a different approach? Or is it that we can't assume there is a basic knowledge that perhaps wasn't the case a generation ago?
Well, I'm seeing more and more that people in the United States do not have that background that we had in the South many years ago. And so you have to start where they are. But
how do we continue to build this bridge? How do we continue to keep this conversation going in our communities, within our churches, and within our own heart?
Latasha Morrison founded Be the Bridge in 2016. She focuses on Christ-based racial reconciliation. As she said on Better Together TV, a Trinity broadcasting talk show, once a connection is made, for a lasting, meaningful difference, the foundation must be solid.
This bridge that we're talking about building, this bridge here is built on truth, okay? And the abutments, there are abutments that we have that makes a bridge to stand firm and that it doesn't collapse. Mm-hmm. And that abutment in this bridge work that we're talking about is the gospel, the message of Jesus. Mm-hmm. That is the message that holds us true to this, that we know how to love our neighbor as ourselves, and to love one another as Christ has loved us. That's important in this work. And so we want to make sure that we're leading out in this and that we're making sure that we don't allow flesh to come into the midst of this.
The drunken man knows he has a home, but he doesn't know how to get there.
Matt Hurd is a speaker, teacher, writer, pastor, coach, and the founder and principal of a ministry called Thrive. Here, he's speaking at First Baptist Church in Orlando.
As fallen human beings, we're all image bearers, and we have that eternity in our heart, and we have a hunger for home. We have a yearning for life. You go to some coffee shop in this post-Christian culture, tap on a glass, say, how many of you are desiring this morning to be forgiven of your sins and to get to heaven? How many people wake up with that on their list? No, nobody. Very, very few people. Important things, but that's not where they are. But how many people are yearning to be alive? And along comes this invitation. You're hereby invited by God through the gospel to embrace the story that will reclaim you into the original purpose you're made for. But there's a second aspect of the invitation. You're also invited by God to experience the wholeness that'll restore you.
So the bridge, as Matt outlines, in many cases isn't asking a stranger about heaven or hell, that tried and true question, but rather asking if they'd like to live a purposeful life. He quotes one of the ancient fathers, Irenaeus, "The glory of God is a human fully alive."
It's not just about getting your ticket to heaven. It's about becoming part of the great story in your work, in your play, in every aspect of your journey. It's also about being restored on a daily basis. Every evangelical church says, okay, you need to trust Jesus as Messiah. That's the thing. And so often we catch this thing of, well, once I've done that, I'm done. I'm going to wait for heaven. No. Then comes the daily believing. It's not just past tense belief. And that by believing, you may have life in his name. Let's call that vibrancy. Orthodoxy is the lyrics. Vibrancy is the music. Together they make the dance. And we're in a crisis within the evangelical church right now because a lot of young people are dissing the orthodoxy of the faith. And one of the reasons, though, that they're doing that is because they don't see our vibrancy. It's understanding that the reason he came was to enable us to live to his glory, not just for ourselves, but to do all of life underneath this beautiful enablement by his Spirit, governed by an intimacy with him.
For Ron Tyler, a problem he's run into while talking to those without faith.
And she came up and started talking to me, and she said, you know, there was some Christian guys that came in here the other day and told me, with all these tattoos, I'm going to go to hell. And I mean, I'd never met her before. I don't know why she started on me about this. And of course, I didn't say anything. I just listened to her. But then I noticed not only asking questions, but also being observant. I noticed that she was wearing a cross. And I said, does that cross have any meaning to you? And she said, oh, my grandmother, this was my grandmother's cross, and she gave it to me. And I said, that must have been really special. So I just asked her to tell me about it. So we can use those opportunities to build bridges to get to a point where the person is more open to hear the gospel at the appropriate time.
The most effective way to start building a bridge, ask questions and listen. We're all too anxious to talk. And
prayer is so important. Prayer is the key that unlocks the door.
While Ron was serving in Africa, he created a picture book to share Christ with those who couldn't read. He also helped build leaders. Lessons he teaches are universal.
And he wants to build up leaders. And leaders have to be open to his direction. And so to me, sometimes we'll just grab something off the shelf and let's use this, or let's use that, or let's use this program, or whatever. But to me, each leader should be searching and praying and saying, God, what do you want us to do? And so it drives us back to a deeper walk with Christ. And also for the lay people, they begin to see how God wants to work through them.
Well, that's a perfect transition to your book. And I love the title. You want me to do what? To God.
Okay. Well, Stuart, I never planned to write a book. It just wasn't on my agenda. But I knew all these stories, in these 50 real life experiences of God's faithfulness. And so people kept saying, you got to put this in a book. You got to put it in a book. And so one day, people were telling me, but then God hadn't spoken to me yet, but I felt he did. And he said, write these stories down. Write these stories down. And so that's what I did. And I began writing them down. And then at the end of every story, there's a application to the reader, which was not in the original plan. My wife and I talked about it. And so what I would do is I would just sit at my computer and read the story. And then I had a particular software I could speak into the computer. And I would just pray and I say, God, what do you want to say? And I would feel him reveal to me what he wanted to say. And that's what I would speak. And that's the way each chapter ends in this book. And so then it became, the book of all these stories, and they're real life experiences. And that to me is something that I feel that we've been missing. This book encourages the reader to how to live their life daily and how to see their prayers turn into things that are impossible become possible. And they begin to see how God desires to live his life through you. And no matter who you are. But in that prayer that I prayed originally, God, I'll be anything you want me to be. I'll go anywhere you want me to go, and I'll do anything you want me to do. And that's total surrender. And surrender is not a form of weakness. It takes courage. It takes courage to totally surrender. Some people say, well, I commit to this. I go far beyond that. To me, surrender. Surrender is totally yielding yourself to God, to Jesus, because you totally are trusting him because you believe that you can trust him.
And doesn't that lead to what we're talking about, building those bridges somewhere to someone?
Yes.
If you've listened to my other podcasts, read my book or blogs, you've heard the statistics. Fewer Americans are following Christ. The culture is more antagonistic to the faith, less open to church. That means it's time to get out of the pews and build those bridges. Ron is not discouraged.
Now I am more encouraged and more just have a bigger vision of how God can use all of us in multiple ways, and that I just see that I'm just another child of God that he's using to share with one after another and telling them about how Jesus wants to live their life through them daily.
Ron Tyler answered God when he called Ron to surrender and served Christ around the world. His prayer is that the stories in his book, You Want Me to Do What?, will inspire all of us to build some bridges. I'm Stuart Kellogg.
Thank you for listening to What Now, the Post-COVID Church podcast. Our hope is that some of the ideas you've heard will help your ministry engage the lost and hurting in your community. If you'd like a copy of Stuart's book, The Post-COVID Church, an action plan to thrive, not just survive, you can order the paperback or ebook version at Amazon.com. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform, and it will mean so much if you'd share the podcast.